I'm going to start off with what I was just talking about in the editorial there, this issue of selling more power assets, because we've already sold plenty, to Chinese state-owned corporations or even a Hong Kong corporation. Here's what Treasurer Scott Morrison had to say about his dilemma on Sky News yesterday.
How vital will be the security factor in your decision?
It's the prime consideration. It's the most important consideration, and always is, Paul. Always has been, always will be. It is the #1 issue. It's why I put David Irvine on FIRB. It's why I put David Peever on FIRB, to have the national security experience and input into these decisions and to assist me making these decisions.
And for once, opposition leader Bill Shorten was in total agreement about the national security implications.
They need to take these matters seriously. They can't dismiss concerns around jobs, around electricity prices and around national security merely because Premier Baird wants to try and get an inflated price before the next election for the sale of New South Wales electricity assets.
Now, Wacker, as you point out, National Senator, we know the Nationals have a very strong policy on selling assets, particularly to the Chinese. We've seen it on agricultural land. Will the Nats have a strong position on selling more power assets to the Chinese?
You'd have to, at the federal level, as far as whether we'd agree to it or not, I can't speak on behalf of the Nats as a humble backbencher. But Janine, I've said all along, foreign investment is good. When the investment creates more jobs, more production, more output, more GDP, more tax take for Canberra, it's a win-win. But I'm very concerned when businesses are fully established, completely established, and they're bought from foreigners, bought by foreigners, then the profit is taken out of our country. And we need the money. Of course, the state is saying we want to sell this off or lease it off for 99 years. Then with that money we're going to spend on more infrastructure for the people in New South Wales, which I've done before. Very good thing. But I'm concerned about the profit being taken away, and of course, as Scott Morrison said, security is a big issue.
Well, if the Nats weren't happy about selling cattle farms, which were already foreign-owned to Chinese interests, one would think that strategic electricity grids might be an issue for you.
Could well be an issue, but as I said, I can't speak on behalf of the Nats. I speak on behalf of my own opinion only.
And would you sell the assets to the Chinese?
No, I wouldn't, because I see the profits going away. We want the money for the investment. We've got $2 trillion in our super funds. Why is everyone overseas saying these are great investments in Australia? Why aren't the people with their superannuation buying these assets and keeping the profit here? That's a question I always ask.
Good point. Troy?
Yeah, well, I think we've had a period now where we've had some heightened fears over Chinese foreign investment in agriculture, in property. Some of those fears, I think, are often irrational and illogical. We haven't had the same kind of debate so far about energy assets. And as you pointed out at the start, Janine, a lot of our energy assets around the country already do have a fair slice of foreign ownership or investment in them. So I'm not particularly concerned about the whole bogey of foreign investment, which I think it has become, regrettably, even though the economic benefits are substantial for jobs and for growth and for tax and so on. But this debate has now become about security. So that has added another layer of complexity to this very already complex debate that already has high passions around it. So it's perfectly sensible for the government to say we've got to look at these security issues and for the opposition to support them on that. But how you actually decide those things, how you decide whether or not something is a possible security risk or a security threat, I don't know, because as you said as well, Janine, you know, the Chinese hackers can already hack into almost any software system on the planet. So whether or not you restrict foreign ownership or not in terms of power assets, I'm not sure that's actually going to address the security issue.
Ross, Troy points out it's become a security issue, but it's really a political issue, isn't it?
Yes, in my judgment, almost entirely. I think it's possible to make an argument that a Chinese purchaser is different to some other purchaser if they are owned by the government, if they're a state-owned enterprise. So you are introducing a sovereign set of objectives beyond giving a return to investors. And people are entitled to ask that question. I just say to you, Janine, that I regard this as 99% gutlessness on behalf of the leadership class, in which I include the National Party.
Thanks for the plug, Ross.
It's okay, because there is this realisation that there's probably a few votes to be had out there if you stoke up the anti-Chinese instinct. And let's remember the first bill that the Australian Labor Party brought to the Australian Parliament was one to entrench a White Australia policy, largely in response to Chinese presence on the gold fields. I'm saying we have come a long way in 117 years. And what you're really seeing, whether we like it or not, is a more productive economy is creating trillions of dollars in wealth, and it has to go somewhere. Now, the United States right now has about 20 trillion in government debt, 1/3 of which is owned by, guess who, the Chinese. So if the Americans can say, oh, we can have the Chinese be our banker for 1/3 of our national debt, I think Australians can just relax a little bit.
But your mate Donald Trump's about to start a trade war with them, slapping on a tariff. They mightn't be so kind about foreign investment with that, might they?
Well, look, they may or may not be. I mean, I don't predict what their reactions to Donald Trump may be. What I am saying to you is that Chinese cannot load up Australia's electricity generation assets and put them in the back of a ute and take them somewhere else. I mean, they are here to stay. All we are really talking about is what the name of what entity is on the ownership documents. And I will say that I expect the Chinese to run them much more efficiently. I mean, Bill Shorten wants these assets to be run for the benefit of the Electrical Trades Union. That is his goal and his objective. I think it's quite as they have been, in fact, for decades. And in fact, it was the unions who destroyed Bob Carr and Michael Egan's correct attempt to sell assets when we would have got a much higher price for them than we're going to get today. So I say to the Australian people, you can relax. The Chinese have been overwhelmingly good for Australia. Indeed, Australian multiculturalism works because it is anchored in and dominated by the Chinese.
So
Yes, a
what do you
response if I
gutless
could,
Nats
please.
say?
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's not just you gutless Nats. I mean, Ross is talking about people, I think Pauline Hanson, Bob Katter, the Xenophon Party. There's a lot of other
Labor.
people raising issues, Labor.
Yeah, I make the
Forgot
point
them.
about investment, Ross. Now, when the Chinese bought the River Ord Mark II scheme, 15,000 hectares of land to be levelled, set up the sugar mill, sugar refinery, etc., 450 jobs. I didn't hear of one Nat opposing it because it was investment, growing jobs, 450 jobs mainly for Indigenous people up there in the Kimberleys. And it was growing the exports, growing the production, growing the GDP. It was proper investment. Tell me what's going to grow the sell-off of already established business like Ausgrid.
Well,
what's going to grow? I'll tell you what's going to grow is the money going out of our country to raise living standards overseas instead of being kept here. That's why I'm saying it should be bought by Australians such as super fund.
Mate, I can tell you, whoever is advising the South Australian government should be hauled before a royal commission. Because the South Australian people are now paying often 5 times the cost for the spot price of a kilojoule of electricity.
$14,000 a kilowatt hour.
5 times, because these clowns down there, whoever's advising them, I would bring the Chinese Communist Party down to Adelaide, put them in charge of the whole operation tomorrow.
The Chinese communists do already own most of the South Australian electricity, so that hasn't worked then, has it?
Well, it's
on
been,
your basis?
Well, the problem for the South Australians has been this blind ideological commitment of failed left and Green
Chinese
Labor
investment
governments who are
doesn't
now
solve all the
forcing
problems.
the weakest mainland economy to withstand this massive assault of power prices 5 times the national average. It is a disgrace.
But they're saving the planet, remember, South Australia?
Yeah, thanks very
Troy,
much.
what about the role of Labor in this? I mean, isn't Bill Shorten being a bit disingenuous? Because when Labor's in power, before and after, they will deal with Chinese investment too, and they're going to wave things through.
Well, sure, and in many ways the same rules and the same restrictions pretty much apply, I mean, in this debate. But it was very interesting to see Bill Shorten there in the footage that you played, Janine, because he hit a number of hot-button issues there. He said power prices was one, that's a big consumer issue. Then he said jobs, or that's a big union issue, as Ross referred to, and he's going to want some guarantees there for the industry. And he also mentioned security. So there's a whole bunch of issues there that are all mashed up together, which is sort of a way for Labor to say, we don't like this, it's a problem for the government, we're going to pass it on to them, but, you know, we're not really
But
for
play
it.
to their base as well.
But play to their base.
Just on the
one issue
security,
there.
I'm just going to... Oh, sorry, go on, quick.
Bill, talking about the power prices from the opposition leader, Shorten, he's the one who wants to bring in the carbon tax and put the prices up. So isn't that a little bit ironic that he wants to keep the prices down, but his policy wants to put them up?
Good point, Wacker.
Sure. Sure, but that's a whole other debate. I mean, you know,
not
if you want to
going
address
down that
climate change, you've got to get people to pay more so they use less. I mean, that's the principle.
Just on the security issue, here's the Peter Jennings from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute with our own Laura Jays, just being quite tough about the threats here.
State Grid, the Chinese state-owned entity, I think should really be completely out of contention because it is one which has very direct links into the Communist Party. And really that means to say that ultimately it would be a Chinese Communist Party-owned business running Sydney's electricity infrastructure. I think that's largely going to be seen to be unacceptable.
Ross is a great fan of the Chinese Communist Party. That wouldn't worry you at all, his warning, would it?
Well, I can tell you we've now got 2 Australian states led by basically white guys in South Australia and Tasmania who are approaching energy crisis. The most fundamental thing in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, after oxygen, sort of shelter, warmth, energy. The cost of energy is one of the best predictors of the quality of life and standard of living in cities all over the world. You're going to have Tasmanians wandering around, you know, buying like single cigarettes on the side of the road and bloody, you know, a tank full of Kero to light their houses because there's no energy in Tasmania.
But again, they've got other issues on it. And again, that comes to political problems. They've got 20 towns that haven't even got drinking water at the moment. So they've got more fundamental political problems.
The Chinese have just moved 600 million people out of poverty into a kind of middle class, out of villages into cities. The Chinese understand infrastructure. They know how to do it cheaply, efficiently, effectively. We're at this unique moment in history where they've got a low cost of labour but a very high level of technological and engineering competence. We are nuts if we don't take full advantage of this moment.
Troy, is a compromise going to be banning the ones Peter Jennings talking about, State Grid, the absolute state-owned Chinese Communist Party company, and going for Chung Kong, which is actually a Hong Kong billionaire, Hong Kong-listed company? Now, there's a feeling that China really can exert influence on any Hong Kong company, given their influence in China. But would that be, as somebody who follows the political side, would that be the compromise? Or do you think politically it'd still be a problem?
Well, I think it could be because you can obviously set up a dichotomy between one good Chinese company and one bad Chinese company and sell it to an electorate that doesn't really understand the complexity of these issues that Ross has outlined this evening in great detail. So, yes, that could be one way through. But remember, this is a New South Wales coalition government plan to maximise the money that they can get from these assets. So their interest is obviously not security, that's a federal government concern. Their main concern is to get as much money as they can. So I think that there'll be some very strong words from Mike Baird to his federal counterparts, making sure that they do get the most money they can get, and that's probably most likely going to be a Chinese-based company.
Yeah, and after the debacle with the port of Darwin, which I didn't think should have gone to China. But just finally on this, Wacker, do you think, would it be more acceptable to have a Hong Kong-listed company rather than Chinese state, or are the Nats against all foreign investment or just Asian investment? How does it work?
Only speak on, give you my opinion.
Okay. Do you think, are there degrees, are there worse foreign investment? Are there some that
I'm concerned when governments are buying our assets. I would feel a little bit more comfortable if the Hong Kong business was to buy. At least it's a business, a company. Probably be able to buy shares in it. But you can't buy shares in the Chinese government.
Okay, that sounds like we've solved the government's policy on it.